While the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa might be over, there's still a number of opportunities here for legal challenges that could cause a public awakening or a public questioning into what exactly happened. Why did the government invoke the Emergency Act, and were they legally allowed to do this? And if not, why are we seeing government have such a large amount of overreach in situations that don't necessarily call for it? Does this relate to what else we're seeing in our world right now with the increasing powers of government? All questions that will be on the table, but let's look at what happened here. The Canadian Constitution Foundation has launched a legal challenge against Justin Trudeau over the invocation of the Emergency Act. The CCF is a registered charity. They're independent and nonpartisan, and their mission is to defend the constitutional freedoms of Canadians. Their legal challenge basically argues two main points: that the criteria were not met to invoke the act, and that a number of charter rights and freedoms were broken through the invocation of this act. So when it comes to the criteria not being met to invoke the act, the CCF explains, the act defines a national emergency as an urgent and critical situation of temporary nature that seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and is of such proportions or nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with it, or seriously threatens the ability of the Canadian government to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. So if you looked at the footage or you see what was happening down in Ottawa, you would see pretty clearly that there was no, endangerment to people. Nobody's health, safety, or lives were at risk by what went on down there. And I know that, through hyperbole, the government was trying to kind of make that case. And there was a number of Ottawa citizens saying, my life is being terrorized by these people. But in all actuality, when we're getting down to brass tacks, this in no way, shape, or form was happening down in Ottawa. Now, I know some people are arguing that, well, the Emergency Act was also there to, protect the border situation so that, goods can continue to come in and out of the country and, the country could be fed. And, this was a serious issue if the economy is under attack by border blockades. But we saw very clearly that even before the invocation of the Emergency Act, provincial police were able to handle and shut down those border blockades quite easily. So again, the need for this Emergency Act just was not there in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's what ultimately the CCF is arguing here. They're also arguing in their second point that multiple charter rights and freedoms were broken through this act. So the right to free assembly, the right to be free from unreasonable search, and the right to liberty were all taken away from people through the invocation of this act. So they're arguing that as well. They're hoping that ultimately this case will be heard by the end of March, but they really don't have an update as to when this will actually go through. The interesting aspect of this is also the timing. On February 19th, the police had pretty well cleared all of Wellington Street. We were there on the ground seeing what was going on. Wellington Street was, the area where the protest was, where all the trucks were parked, amongst a few other areas in the downtown core of Ottawa. But for the most part, that was the street, right, that they were trying to take back. And they had cleared everybody out of there by that date, by the tail end of the day. So at that point, you don't have an emergency any longer, yet here you have on the 21st, which is just a couple days after that, Trudeau is still saying, hey, we need to extend this emergency. The emergency is still in place. Even though the police have complete control of the entire situation, we need to get an extension. So here he goes to the House of Commons looking for votes from his fellow politicians to extend the Emergency Act. So on the 21st, he got those votes late at night to extend. And then just a couple of days later, all of a sudden, he's revoking the Emergency Act. All of a sudden, it's no longer an emergency. We don't need this to be in place. Well, the interesting part about that is that, you also had the Senate hearing that was coming up. So although Trudeau was able to move through with all this stuff, it still had to be passed through the Senate. So the Senate would basically say, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at what you're claiming is the need for this Emergency Act. And it was believed by a lot of people that when Trudeau revoked it on the 23rd is because the government, the Liberal Party essentially knew that they weren't going to get this past the Senate. It was going to be struck down. So then it becomes a PR issue. Does Trudeau and their government want it to appear as though they made the decision to revoke this, that they were clear enough in their mind that, hey, this is no longer an emergency. We did what we needed to do. We're going to take this off ourselves, versus the Senate struck down our, illegal use of the Emergency Act in essence, right? So it becomes a PR issue at that point, which leads to a greater discussion, right? At the end of the day, here we're seeing politics being played, right? It's It's my perception versus your perception, and the people who lose at the end of the day and who are pitted against each other are the average everyday citizen. And this is a large challenge that exists in so many different areas of our world right now, where, at this point in time, politics has literally become something where we're not thinking, or people are not thinking about the best of the people. What do the people really need? How can we serve the people in a meaningful way? It's, again, protecting our own policies, protecting our own egos, protecting our own agendas that don't seem to be in alignment with people. And, interestingly enough, even the former Defense Minister Perry Beattie, who introduced the Emergency Act in 1987, had this to say about the use of the Emergency Act by the Trudeau government in this particular case. What I regret in looking at the situation today is how poisoned with partisanship Parliament has become, which then undercuts the ability of Parliament and parliamentary committees to actually contribute to the legislative process. So here we are as a society believing in this concept of let's, utilize politics, let's utilize the democratic process, let's utilize the people in positions of Parliament who are supposed to represent us in order for things to get done. But what we're seeing through this, and this is for me one of the big public awakening moments, is that it doesn't matter that the process exists. It doesn't matter that there is a democratic process. Leaders will do whatever they want, even if it means illegally invoking extremely powerful measures to essentially take care of very small situations that really don't require that type of heavy hand, which leads to the idea of why these legal groups are very concerned. They're concerned because the invocation of this act, it going through and it not being challenged, which they are challenging by taking Trudeau and the government to court, if they're not challenged, it sets a precedent. A few years from now, well, remember that time when there was those people protesting in Ottawa and Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act? Well, he did it, therefore it's okay, right? So as we start to normalize these ideas of very heavy-handed government, as we normalize these ideas of emergencies, everything's an emergency. COVID was an emergency. Every aspect of COVID was an emergency. We can forgive all the bad decisions. We can forgive, the fact that politicians kept doing something even when they knew better because then it was an emergency. So we set these sort of dangerous cultural and perhaps legal precedents that, if not gone challenged by the people or by, individuals or by foundations or associations that are suing the government, then it just becomes something we accept. And so this is why in the very short term, it's important that these things are happening, and it's important that we continue to hold government to account, because while in the long term, I think all of us want to see a world where we are truly thriving, where maybe we don't have as much government in place to tell us what to do, and instead we perhaps have stewards that are stewarding a beautiful situation for community to grow and evolve and to live a meaningful life. In the short term, we have heavy-handed government, and they're trying to take more power. And there's a certain level of engagement that is being asked, basically in the situation where people say, hey, what actually is going on? Am I just going to sit down and not understand that my government is continually pushing for more and more and more and more and more power, normalizing this aggressiveness? Or is it time for me to get engaged and basically say, we got to push back on this. We got to change our conversations. And we got to start understanding that government is not doing things, perhaps in most cases, that is really in the benefit of the people. It's in the benefit of something else. What exactly is that? That's an entirely different conversation, which we're not going to get into right now. But the general point is there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had here, and these moments, these current events, give us that opportunity to do so. And of course, at the same time, for those of us who are kind of wise to a lot of this stuff that's been going on, not just here during the time of COVID, but for a long time, this type of behavior from government has been going on. We've perhaps just been less, aware of what's been happening. But for those of us who are kind of ready for a conversation that's a little bit deeper, where we're saying, is it even within our existing systems and infrastructures, our existing political system, can it really even solve the challenges we have today? Or do we need to start looking at creating parallel systems, creating new and interesting ways of dealing with society and dealing with community? A lot of people are very intrigued, including myself, by those types of conversations. And I would say that it's important to normalize that. Let's normalize conversations that look outside of our existing systems and infrastructures and see how we can solve problems, see how we can formulate new parallel, basically societies that might be operating at a smaller scale that don't recognize the illegitimacy of the existing systems we have today. So it's like, yeah, they might exist. We don't need to put all our power in them. What else can we do, right? Let's have those conversations while at the same time saying, but this short-term situation that's happening is a near-term, sort of a crisis that we need to deal with. And let's put some energy into that as well. So that's kind of what we're proposing here in terms of a way to think about, a way to analyze this situation. Yes, it's happening on a legal front, but let's also look at what other deeper conversations can we have as a people. And of course, here at The Pulse and our other channel, Collective Evolution, we try and foster those types of conversations as much as we can. That's it. That's all on this. We'll keep you up to date as to what's happening with these legal challenges as time goes on. Be sure to subscribe, like, and of course, share this video with other people. We're actively trying to grow our presence here on YouTube and other platforms. So that's going to come from you, getting the word out. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you next time.